Okay, so you want to own a superyacht. You picture the teak deck under bare feet, the tender ferrying guests to a private beach, a chef plating dinner as the sun drops into the Mediterranean. The boat itself, a floating declaration that you've made it. That's the picture. Here's the number that breaks it. Buy a 100-foot yacht for $10 million, and before you've spent a single night aboard. You're already on the hook for somewhere between $1 and $1.5 million a year, just to keep the thing afloat, staffed, and insured. Not to use it, just to own it. Here's what nobody tells you going in. In yachting, there's a rule everyone repeats and almost nobody applies correctly. It's called the 10% rule. Budget roughly 10% of the purchase price every single year for running costs. It's the first thing every broker tells a first-time buyer. And it's also, according to people who actually manage these vessels for a living, wrong for most of the yachts it gets applied to. On a smaller, newer, lightly used boat, 10% is a reasonable floor. On anything approaching true superyacht territory, 40 meters and up, operated the way owners actually use them, the real figure runs 12 to 15%. And on the largest vessels in the world, it climbs past 20. That gap between the number everyone quotes and the number everyone actually pays is where a lot of yacht owners get their first unpleasant surprise. We're going inside the real economics of superyacht ownership. We'll build the boat, staff it, fuel it, insure it, dock it, and then ask the question every prospective owner eventually asks their accountant. Is there any version of this that pays for itself? First, understand what you're actually buying, because it isn't a boat in the way a fishing trawler is a boat. A 100-foot-plus superyacht is a small, floating hotel with a hospital-grade engineering plant underneath it, crewed by a live-aboard staff that has to be paid, fed, insured, trained, and rotated. 12 months a year, whether the owner sets foot on board or not. It runs its own water-making system, its own power generation, its own waste treatment, its own satellite communications, and increasingly its own stabilization and dynamic positioning systems that would look at home on a research vessel. You are not buying a vehicle. You are buying an asset class that happens to float, depreciates like a car, costs like a small business, and requires a permanently employed household staff the moment you take delivery. Start with what it costs to get one in the first place, because the sticker price is only the entry fee. New-build superyachts from the major yards run into the tens of millions for a mid-size, professionally crewed vessel in the 30 to 50-meter range, and costs scale sharply from there. The largest yachts in the world, built by yards like Lewison and Feedship, run past the half-billion mark once you include the custom engineering, the interior fit-out, and the owner's inevitable list of changes mid-build. Buy second-hand instead, and you dodge the multi-year build queue and the worst of new-build markup, but you inherit somebody else's maintenance history, and the depreciation clock is already running. That clock matters more here than in almost any other luxury asset category. Industry broker data tracking resale values shows that yachts from top-tier builders, names like Feedship, Lewison, and Royal Huisman, hold their value meaningfully better after the 5-year mark than the broader market average, which is exactly why owners chasing resale value pay a premium for those yards up front. Buy from a lesser-known builder, and the depreciation curve in the first 5 years can be brutal enough to erase a third or more of the purchase price before you've even gotten to the annual running costs. And those running costs are where the real financial commitment lies, because unlike a car sitting in a garage, a yacht doesn't get cheaper to own when it's not being used. Crew is the single largest line item, typically 30 to 40% of the entire annual operating budget, and it scales with the size of the vessel in a way that surprises most first-time owners. A 160-foot yacht needs a captain, 1 or 2 engineers, a chef, stewards, and deckhands, a crew of roughly 8 to 10 people. And industry surveys put captain salaries alone at $200,000 a year or more on a vessel of that size, with the full crew payroll for that size boat running $600,000 to $900,000 annually before benefits, training, travel, and turnover costs. Scale up to a 50-meter yacht, and the crew payroll alone can run into 7 figures, because larger vessels need more specialized engineering staff, more stewardesses to service more guest cabins. and often a dedicated chief officer just to manage everyone else. Fuel is the second major line, and it's brutally simple. Bigger engines burn more, and superyachts are built for range and speed, not efficiency. A yacht that actually cruises, rather than sitting at the dock, can burn through fuel costs that rival a small airline's, especially on the larger motor yachts built for ocean crossings rather than coastal hops. Insurance adds another significant slice, commonly running close to $250,000 a year on a serious superyacht. And that number climbs further if the owner plans to charter the vessel to paying guests, since chartering triggers a different, more expensive class of liability coverage. Dockage is its own quiet drain. Berthing a large yacht in a premier marina during peak season can run anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 a night. And an owner who wants to spend a season in the Mediterranean and a season in the Caribbean can find dockage alone approaching a quarter to a third of $1 million a year once transit costs are included. Then there's maintenance, and this is the category that separates owners who planned properly from owners who didn't. A large yacht typically requires well over $1 million a year in routine maintenance alone, covering engine service intervals, hull inspections, anti-fouling, safety equipment recertification, and the constant upkeep of onboard systems, from HVAC and navigation electronics to generators and stabilizers, that have to perform to the standard a paying-for luxury owner expects. That's before the periodic refit every few years, a dry dock overhaul that can run into the millions on its own, repainting the hull, replacing worn systems, updating interiors to keep the vessel competitive if it's ever chartered or resold. Owners who budget only for day-to-day running costs and ignore the refit reserve are the ones who get blindsided 5 to 7 years in, when the yacht needs a genuine structural and cosmetic overhaul all at once. Layer all of that together, and you get to the real shape of the 10% rule, which, once you actually itemize it, isn't 10% at all for most working superyachts. On a 50-meter new-build motor yacht operated privately at a normal pace, industry cost-tracking data puts annual running costs at 4 to 6 million euros a year, which on a vessel valued in the 30 to 40 million euro range works out closer to 12 to 15% than the folklore figure everyone quotes at the brokerage table. Push into the largest yachts in the world, 200 feet and beyond, and the operating budget can run $6 to $8 million a year, with the biggest megayachts on the planet requiring $16 to $24 million annually just to remain fully staffed, fueled, insured, and maintained. None of that includes financing costs if the purchase was leveraged, and none of it includes the depreciation that's silently eating the underlying asset value the entire time. So before a single guest has stepped aboard, before a single charter contract has been signed, the owner of a serious superyacht is looking at a fixed, recurring, largely non-negotiable annual bill that runs into the millions, on top of a purchase price that was already tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, on top of a resale value that's quietly eroding every year the yacht exists. That's the cost side of the ledger, and it's brutal on its own. But it raises the obvious question every prospective buyer eventually asks their broker: if the yacht sits idle most of the year anyway, can you rent it out to strangers and have the whole thing pay for itself? Start with a number that gets whispered at every yacht show and repeated in every brokerage pitch. Charter your yacht for a few weeks a year, and the income covers the running costs. It's the single most common argument used to justify a superyacht purchase as something other than pure expense, and it deserves a serious look, because the actual math tells a very different story than the pitch. Here's how yacht charter actually works. When the owner isn't using the vessel, it goes into a charter program, and guests pay a weekly rate to use the yacht with full crew, typically during the high-demand windows. The Mediterranean in summer, the Caribbean in winter. Weekly rates scale dramatically with size and quality, from roughly $50,000 a week on a modest charter yacht up past $2.5 million a week on the largest, most exclusive vessels in the world. On paper, a yacht chartering for 8 to 12 weeks a year at premium rates looks like it could generate serious income. In practice, the industry's own published data tells a much less flattering story. Boat International, one of the yachting industry's most credible trade publications, ran the actual numbers on real charter yachts and published the results, and they're worth sitting with. A 48-meter motor yacht, chartering 7 weeks a year in the Western Mediterranean at rates between 250 and 310,000 euros a week. Generated 1.592 million euros in charter income against 1.575 million euros in running costs. That's a profit of 17,000 euros. On a yacht that size, with that charter income, the entire year of chartering nets out to less than the price of a nice car, and that's before counting the owner's own use of the vessel, which the charter income didn't even need to cover. A 47-meter sailing yacht in the same study, chartering 9 weeks a year, actually lost 444,000 euros. Charter income covered only about 2/3 of its running costs. An 85-meter motor yacht chartering 8 weeks lost 430,000 euros. The publication's own conclusion, after running the numbers on multiple real vessels, was blunt. A genuinely profitable charter superyacht is still the exception, not the rule. There is one path that works, and it's worth understanding exactly what it requires, because it's narrower than most owners expect. The one yacht in the study that generated real positive income, up to 2 million euros net, was a 60-meter operated at 12 weeks of charter a year. And the broker interviewed about it was explicit about what that required. The owner had to give priority to bookings during the highest demand weeks of the year, meaning giving up their own use of the prime season, choose crew specifically suited to commercial charter work rather than private family service, and run the entire operation in a genuinely commercially minded way rather than treating charter as an occasional side activity. In other words, the only owners who make real money chartering are the ones who stop treating the yacht as a private toy that occasionally earns some money back, and start treating it as an actual hospitality business that occasionally lets the owner aboard. For everyone else, and industry data suggests that's the overwhelming majority of owners, charter income offsets somewhere between 20 and 50% of running costs across a typical 8 to 12-week charter season. That's genuinely useful. It is not, in almost any real case documented by the industry's own trade press, a path to yacht ownership paying for itself, let alone turning a profit. The honest rule of thumb the industry itself uses: chartering makes financial sense as an alternative to ownership for anyone using a yacht fewer than 8 weeks a year. Above that usage threshold, you're not really running a charter business anymore. You're an owner who occasionally rents out an extremely expensive asset to strangers, and mostly just subsidizing your own hobby a little. That subsidization gets even more complicated once you account for what charter guests actually do to a yacht. A vessel used hard by paying guests wears out faster than one used gently by an owner and a small circle of family and friends. More sailing hours means more engine wear, more interior refurbishment, more turnover in soft furnishings and finishes that have to look flawless for the next charter brochure photo. The maintenance and refit budget that already ran into 7 figures annually on a private yacht climbs further once that yacht is being marketed and used as a commercial charter asset. Which means part of the charter revenue that looks like profit on a spreadsheet is quietly being consumed by accelerated where the owner wouldn't have paid for otherwise. Now the risk side of the ledger, because superyacht ownership carries failure modes that are easy to underestimate until they actually happen. The most basic one is depreciation, and it's steeper here than in almost any other asset class marketed as a luxury investment. A yacht is a depreciating physical object the moment it leaves the yard, not an appreciating one, and unlike real estate, there's no scarcity of land underneath it working in the owner's favor. Broker-aggregated resale data shows that yachts from top-tier builders hold value meaningfully better after the 5-year mark than the broader market, which is precisely why those builders can charge a premium in the first place, buy from a lesser-known yard chasing a lower sticker price. And the loss in the first 5 years of ownership can be severe enough to make the eventual resale look like a rounding error next to what was actually spent to own the boat. The second risk is crew, and it's a risk most first-time buyers don't see coming because it doesn't show up on any cost spreadsheet. A superyacht crew isn't a service contract, It's a live-aboard household staff, and like any staff, it has turnover, morale issues, and skill gaps that can directly affect the vessel's safety and the owner's experience. A careless engineer can turn a routine mechanical issue into a six-figure repair. A weak captain can damage the hull docking in a tight marina, or worse, put the vessel and its passengers at genuine risk in open water. Because crew costs are already the single largest recurring expense on the ownership ledger. Owners who try to economize here by hiring cheaper or less experienced crew are making the riskiest possible cut on the one-line item where quality failures are the most expensive to absorb. The third risk is regulatory and jurisdictional complexity, and it accumulates quietly. Flag state registration, VAT obligations that differ by country of use, customs duties on equipment and provisions, safety certification renewals, each individually minor, together forming an administrative cost and compliance burden that experienced owners hand off entirely to a professional yacht management company, which is itself another recurring fee layered on top of everything else. And then there's the blunt macro risk that applies to almost every luxury asset class. Superyachts are, definitionally, discretionary spending on the largest possible scale and in a genuine downturn. Whether a recession, a geopolitical shock, or a shift in tax policy targeting exactly this kind of asset, owners of yachts are among the first to sell. And the market for buyers of used superyachts can dry up fast precisely when an owner most needs liquidity. Put all of it together into a single worked picture. Take a 50-meter motor yacht purchased new for roughly 35 million euros. Annual running costs, following the real-world data rather than the folklore 10% figure, land around 5 million euros a year. Crew payroll around 1.8 million. Fuel and dockage together around 1 million. Insurance $250,000, routine maintenance approaching $1 million, with the remainder split across management fees, provisions, and compliance. If the owner charters the yacht for the industry-typical 8 to 10 weeks a year at a strong weekly rate, charter income might realistically reach 1.5 to 2 million euros, offsetting perhaps a third to 40% of that annual running cost. The owner is still writing a check for roughly 3 million euros a year, every year, purely to keep the vessel operational, on top of an asset that's simultaneously losing value in the resale market the entire time it's owned. Over a 7-year hold, a realistic ownership horizon that first-time buyers are explicitly advised not to go shorter than. That owner has spent north of 20 million euros in running costs on top of the original purchase price, and will sell the yacht for meaningfully less than the 35 million it cost to buy, even accounting for a top-tier builder's stronger resale curve. So who actually comes out ahead in the superyacht economy? It's rarely the private owner treating the boat as a lifestyle purchase with a charter side hustle attached. It's the yards building them, the management companies running them, the brokers selling and reselling them, and the small number of owners disciplined enough to run their vessel as an actual commercial charter operation, prioritizing paying guests over their own use during the exact weeks they'd most want the boat for themselves. Everyone else is paying every year for the right to occasionally stand on a very expensive, slowly depreciating deck. Could you get rich owning a superyacht? Almost never, and that was never really the point for the people who buy them. You are not purchasing an investment with a yield. You are purchasing a fixed, recurring, 7-figure plus annual expense, wrapped around an asset that loses value every year you own it. Staffed by a live-aboard team, you're financially responsible for whether you set foot aboard or not. The teak deck and the private beach are real. So is the check that gets written every single month whether the yacht ever leaves the dock. In superyacht ownership, the wealth was already there before the purchase. The yacht doesn't create it. It just spends it beautifully, one refit at a time.